Praise God.
How old do we have to be to come to the conclusion that we can no longer learn anything? That there's nothing else for us to learn? We don't know why Jesus, or what his state of mind was when he went into the wilderness following his baptism. Perhaps he went there to try to understand the meaning of the presence of God at his baptism, what that meant for his life. Or at that baptism, we are told, a dove descended and a voice came through, said, "This is my beloved, in whom I am well pleased." Whatever were his reasons for going into the wilderness, there is no indication that he expected the ordeal that he encountered there. It was for him to be a time of fasting and praying and meditating. Now, this is the first Sunday of Lent, which signals the beginning of a 40-day period when many Christians across denominations engage in reflection, introspection, forgiveness, and repentance. This story of the experience Jesus had in the desert when he was tempted by the devil on 3 occasions is our lectionary text for the day. We often associate the meaning of temptation with something sensual or sexual that we need to avoid. And there are all kinds of good and bad temptations. You know, a person can be tempted to use their gifts in an abusive way. Someone could take their charisma, their talent, their intelligence, their ability for insight, their strength of character, their own commitments, and be tempted to use them in such a way as to lord them over other people. Temptation is not just a matter of what's weak about us. Sometimes we are tempted to use what is our strengths in a wrong way. Bad temptations are the ones that lure us away from being our best self. And each of us has a sense of our own private demons with which we struggle. And we can become more aware of what bothers us about ourselves, as well as what we like about ourselves when we are still and quiet, and when we honestly reflect upon our lives. I find myself this morning at the beginning of Lent being caught in a mood of this kind of pause on the one hand, but a hopefulness on the other. Have you ever felt sluggish and excited at the same time? Maybe this is what Lent is all about. Putting us in touch with what motivates us on the one hand, but then on the other tells us to, hey, slow down. Reflect, think back. The opportunity that the Lenten season offers us includes something more than atoning for our shortcomings before God. I'm sure we want to clear our souls from anything that may hinder us from having a closer relationship with God. And we all know of some habit of thought or behavior that we can do without. And therefore, we need to work on eliminating it from our life. Now, the 3 offerings the devil made to Jesus were bread, position, and power. With each offer, the devil asked Jesus to demonstrate his faith, to in fact show his identity as one chosen by God. First by turning stone into bread, and then by jumping from a cliff to test whether or not God will take care of him. The other suggestion the devil made to Jesus was that if he joined him, then he would give Jesus the world. Each of these things that the devil offered Jesus is symbolic, was symbolic of some of the temptations we may face ourselves. We may substitute having a shallow relationship with God when we really hunger for something more. Our desire for substance may put us in a state of mind that influences us to accept something less than what we really want in the first place. You see, my friends, I'm just reminding you of things that you already know, I'm sure. The world will always entice us to think that what we have is not enough. Now, that might be true on some levels, but when we really examine our lives and ask ourselves, what do we really have and what do we really want, we will discover that for many of us, I would suggest, the things that are most important to have, we already have. This begs at least two questions then. If the world is always trying to entice us to think that we don't have enough, or whatever it is, then what do we really want? And what is it that will truly help us to live a meaningful and happy life? The devil can only offer us the illusion that what he gives us can meet our deepest longings, a life lived that pleases God. And following his wonderful experience of being baptized in the Jordan, Jesus felt the urge to get away, to be alone in the wilderness. There he faced the questions, who am I? What witness do I want to make to the world, and what am I willing to sacrifice in order to give it? The line between how he understood himself and the offer the devil made him were placed in front of him. And we too have to decide whether or not to cross such a line when it is placed in front of us. Jesus demonstrated by his actions that there was something more important than eating on cue that the devil provided, or making a deal to have power, or to test whether or not God would take care of him should he decide to defy gravity. Please remember, my friends, that faith and reason do complement one another, and God expects us to exercise both faith and common sense. The better things of life come to us through our faithfulness to our better sense of ourselves and to God. Now, some of you know that I try my hand at a few things, and one of them is the sport of golf. I love the sport, perhaps too much. Talk about temptations. And sometimes I practice and I practice and I try so hard to be in control of my body, so hard to do it right. And you know what happens. The harder I try, the more controlling I try to be, that's when the ball keeps kicking me in places that I don't want to mention here. There seems to be an interesting paradox that in order for one to exercise a certain kind of discipline, after learning it, one then has to surrender. You have to relax, you have to let go and trust that you know enough to do your best. Parents know the struggle with this. Sometimes we as parents want to control our children as much as we can. We don't want anything bad to happen to them. If we can, we will control all their actions and wherever they went and who they saw and what car they drove. Faith, she's 13, so she'll be getting a car soon. But we know as parents that the more controlling we are, sometimes our children become more and more rebellious and resentful. even contemptuous. We have to strike a balance between discipline on the one hand and letting go on the other hand. And so it is with an athlete, and so it is even with a jazz musician. I marvel at the impromptu ability of jazz musicians, but in studying about jazz, I've discovered that some of the greatest improvisational jazz musicians were trained in classical music. What you see as, or what I see as just emotional, spirited movement and going up and down those keys and making you feel good. It's not all just emotion. There's a discipline behind that emotion. There's a discipline behind that improvisation. It sounds like a contradiction. The reality is that once you learn, you then have to also learn how to let go. The better things of life come to us through our discipline, through our faithfulness, to our better sense of ourselves and to God, and to our surrender to God. Now, many people are seeking to have a relationship with God. They look to all the things that the church offers, worship and prayers and music and sermons and Bible study, for example, to enrich their faith and to deepen their connection to God. They also look beyond the church or organized religion to find a connection to God and other people. It is no wonder that there are millions of people in the world today who like to describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. Or people who say they attend church, but at the same time they seek connection with God also outside of the church. They are also searching for ways to help others and to have a real fellowship with other people in and outside of the church. In order for these relationships to be authentic and genuine, the people who make up the church need to nurture an atmosphere of Christian love. And this is an ongoing effort. Even the scripture says that after the devil tried to tempt Jesus 3 times, he left him alone for what? An opportune time. He left him alone for another time. You see, we don't try to love one another only once, but over and over and over again. The devil won't leave you alone, but nor does God. The grace of God is present even when we fail or when our suffering makes it difficult for us to trust God. It may be difficult for us to trust that we will find an answer in and a way out of the desert. We don't know how we will act in the desert until we are there. We, of course, hope that if we ever find ourselves in the wilderness, that we will maintain the right state of mind and do the right thing. We have to remind ourselves, when we are in a rough and threatening place, what we know when we are in a safe place. This meant for Jesus that he could distinguish trash masquerading as truth. He trusted in the wisdom of the scriptures and his personal relationship with God. And he held on to the values he was taught at home and in the synagogue. This reminds us not to let an unknown and threatening place we find ourselves in to cause us to lose our minds or to lose our sense of self and what we know is right. I was reminded recently that stress, in addition to its physical impact on us, can also affect the way we think. Sometimes, when I allow myself to be late and rushing, you know how it goes. You can put down a manuscript or a purse or a wallet, a coat, a hat, a pair of gloves, a pair of glasses, right in front of you. Walk out the door and say, where did I put that? And go back and look all over the house. Then you calm down a bit and say, now, here's the common exercise most of us do. let's retrace all of our steps, right? Let's slow down, let's start from the beginning. I was here, I was there, you know, sometimes, most of the time, we find what I want. What's happening? The stress of getting out, running late, or whatever it is, interferes with thinking. We try to multitask, and only when we kind of slow down, retrace ourselves, get our mind back in order, can we then find our way. You might recall the mistake that then Vice President Dan Quayle made when he referred to the slogan of the United Negro College Fund, "The mind is a terrible thing to waste," when he misquoted it by saying, "It's a terrible thing to lose your mind." Well, stress can cause us not to think clearly, and sometimes causes us to make serious mistakes. Jesus did not seem stressed out about being hungry or tempted. Being in the wilderness was definitely an ordeal for him. And so it will be for us if we find ourselves there. But remember these wonderful and beautiful 5 words that's at the end of the challenge Jesus endured. The angels ministered unto him. Jesus was not only restored at the end of his struggle in the wilderness, but he was also transformed by his faithfulness to God. And so it will be for us. His change gave him strength to live on, and a memory upon which he could rely when he faced another time of trial. And so it can be for us. So I ask you, at what point in life does a person come to the conclusion that they have nothing further to learn? There's no further need for them to change. No matter what experiences some people have, some of them seem like they don't change as a result of what they have gone through. Yet the only thing that is constant is change. There are some wilderness places we find ourselves in over which we had no control of entering. The death of a loved one, for example, or the loss of a job, or being rejected by someone to whom we once gave our heart. The Lenten season invites us to voluntarily go into the wilderness. This wilderness is where we can confront our resistance to change, the things that are hurting us, and over which we do have some control, and to face the ugliness in ourselves and in our world, where we can strip off the delusions of what the world offers us as power and happiness. My friends, be not afraid of the wilderness, whether we are forced there or go willingly. God can lead us through it and show us the blessings that come out of the wilderness. It is the blessing of having the right state of mind, which indeed nourishes the soul. Thanks be